Welcome to a bit gamey and back to wargaming. The thing with me is I was an Airfix kid and did a lot of wargaming when I was a teenager and into the early 20s, but then gave it up at some point. Carried on, reading history and doing computer games and stuff, but dropped the miniatures. And then in recent years, watching all these YouTube channels and seeing the quality of the more modern 28mm figures, it made me want to get back into it. And so, starting from scratch again after like 30 plus years, I wanted to try and think about how I'd get back into it in a way that didn't just end up with me spending money in all directions and ending up with nothing useful to show for it. So when I was doing the Airfix stuff, it was divided really into Ancients, Napoleonics and World War II, because that's what most of the figures, or most of the figures that I bought were about. So that's how I started off thinking about it, thinking about these three periods and how I'd get back into it, starting with Ancients. So I started off by thinking about what got me into Ancients in the first place, what sparked it, so I could focus on that aspect and not kind of waste time and money. And I remember the exact moment, because I was reading a book about Alexander as a kid, and they're talking about one of his battles called Wargaming, or Gorgamela, or I don't know how to pronounce it, between Alexander and the Persians. And the historian I was reading was it's a Roman or something, or Greek, I don't know, but some ancient historian, and he was listing the dispositions of the starting armies. And this is the wiki version, so it's not quite the same, but I think it's close enough. It goes, on both flanks, or part of it goes, on both flanks were the cavalry. Bessus commanded the left flank with the Bactrians, Dahay cavalry, Aracosians, Persians, Susians, Cadusians and Scythians. Chariots were placed in front with a small group of Bactrians. Mazaeus commanded the right with the Syrian, Median, Mesopotamian, Parthian, Sacian, Tepurian, Hyrcanian, Caucasian, unpronounceable, Cappadocian and Armenian cavalry. The archers were all Amadi. And then there's a similar list like that for the Macedonian side. Because these are armies like the Persians were a big empire with lots of tributary, lots of factions who were allied to them by force, basically, and who had to send their soldiers to help the Persian king fight. You get this long list of all this wide range of people on different factions, and for all I know, it could just have been a dude sitting on a donkey in a dirty loincloth. But as a kid, you don't think that. You think, Hyrcanian, Tepurian, whatever. You imagine it all being very colourful and exotic. And then your mental picture of these ancient battles is like this long line of people from all over the place, all dressed in a kind of unique way, all very colourful and all very exotic. And that's the mental picture that hooked me on Ancients originally. Admittedly, with Airfix, you're pretty much stuck to Romans and ancient Britons, but in the imagination, it's that's the root of it all. The only problem with all that is there's too much of it. It's like if depends on where you draw the line, but gunpowder sort of say 1500ish, and so from 1500 BC to 1500 AD, you've got about like 3,000 years of ancients, or at least non gunpowder fighting. I mean, if you're still agents, I don't know, at the very least a couple of thousand years until the collapse of Rome and the Dark Ages, blah blah blah. So there's a lot of it, and so if you think about the standard size of a wargame army, it's maybe 12 units, say, of like 20 to 30 figures. You're looking at around like 300 figures for an army. And my list of armies that I wanted was, starting from the beginning, it's like Nubians or Libyans, Sumer or Old Kingdom Egypt, Middle Kingdom Egypt, or what's the one? What are they called? Babylonians, Hittites and New Kingdom, Syrians, Persians, Greeks, Macedon, Rome, early Rome, more Greeks, Gauls in the north, Italian tribes, Carthage, Numidians, and then on to the later imperial with the Iberians, Britons, Germans, and Dacians. So that doesn't get you the full way. That just gets you up to like the middle part of the Roman Empire. So I forget the actual list. It's only like 20 on my list that I made of armies that I would have liked. But 20 times 300 figures. That's I'm just never going to. I mean, even if I bought them all the figures for that, I'd just never paint. I wouldn't have the time to paint them. Not in my lifetime. So what to do? I needed a plan B, because plan A. I mean, if I'd been doing it for 30 years, I might have completed plan A by now. I could have had those 20 times 300 figure ancient armies, but starting with 0 and say 6,000 or whatever figures, it's just there's nowhere I was ever going to paint them. So that was my plan A, but that didn't work. So I needed a plan B. So one option for plan B would be to just use smaller scale figures. Instead of the 28mm, use 15 or 10 or whatever. But as the main reason, or not maybe, but as the spark for this came from wanting to paint all these modern 28mm figures, that was no good. But as I say, so I needed my first thought for plan B was just to have small armies. Instead of having 12 units of 30 figures, have a much smaller. And so the idea I came up with was inspired by DBA. I hadn't played DBA, but I've seen people play it on YouTube. And in DBA, you have your 12 elements, and on the elements, I've got 4 figures each and things like that. So in total, you've got 40, 50 figures maybe. So I wasn't going to do that. I was going to do a 28mm version of that, or my version of that. So you have dividing it into six units each, 6 in the back, and six kind of mainline units in the back, and 6 lots of skirmishers. And each unit would be 8 figures, say for the infantry, and 6 for the cavalry or whatever, and 4 for the lights. It'd be that kind of idea. And because it's mainly about main impetus for this was mainly historical and aesthetic. The idea was just to get all the different types of units in a small representation, and something like that. If these were Romans, it'd be 1632. You're talking about 50 figures or so for an army, and so not really. It was potentially useful in the game, but it probably wasn't. It was just more of a visual thing. But that's the original idea for Plan B, was create small armies, 12 bases, 12 units of 4 to 8 figures each, and that was going to be the plan. So, plan was, I don't know how easy this will be to see, but you get, these are from Victrix, 100 mil wide. Moving trays. So 6 of them in front, 6 in the back. Dosh. And that was going to be my small army. I was going to do loads of them. That was the original plan. Let's see if it's all. I don't know. And I started getting some figures. This is started off. Macedonians were first. No particular reason. They just were. So I was going to be. What was I going to be? So yeah. So. A unit is basically going to be, effectively 2 bases of these 50 by 50 bases. So 2 of those for the Macedonians. Companion cavalry on the right. I don't know if you can see that. Thessalians. Cavalry on the left. And there's going to be Hypaspists on to the right of the phalanx, Greek mercenary allies to the left of the phalanx, and then the lights are going to be Greek light cavalry on the left in front of there and there, Hypaspists there, what are they called, Agranians, the white people that eventually became Thracians there, Cretan archers there, and then for the phalanx, instead of a light unit, you're going to have double size phalanx. And that was going to be Macedonian army, or my small army thing, and that's okay on a from a historical point of view. I mean, it's not entirely right because there's like 5 or 6 phalanx blocks, and there's various things that are not in it, but it's not bad as a representation of their army, but aesthetically, it's not quite, doesn't quite, say from a kind of display point of view, if you had a load of display cases for all these different armies down the ages, that would be okay. But for actual gaming, I don't know, it's not quite enough, I don't feel. So plan C was thinking it needed a minimum of 3. Each unit needed a minimum of 3 to look like it was something, like it was meant to be something, something like that, or the old Thessalians. 3, so you get it doesn't have to be a command base. It's just that was how it worked out. So there's something like that, where it's the same 12 unit idea, but a minimum of 6 figures, or 3 bases worth, which is 6 for cavalry and 12 for the infantry, or heavy infantry, and that's visually, that's visually much more appealing for me. But the problem with that is number of figures again, because it's adding like, I don't know what, 50% to the total figure. It says originally of 50 and going up to 75 or so. And again, if there's 20 armies like that, it's all starting to get, the numbers start creeping up again. So in the end, I thought I needed a plan C. So plan A, 12 regular size armies, that's no good. Plan B, 12 small armies. 12C, slightly less small armies. In the end, I needed a plan D, because even at 75 figures each, 20 armies is too many. So instead, I decided, as this was mostly a kind of historical and a painting thing, I didn't actually need to paint hundreds of boring old skirmishers or levy spearmen. Instead, what I'd do is a kind of regiments down the ages thing. We'll start at the beginning and just pick iconic units. So at the very beginning, like Nubians or Libyan, these kind of can you see it? Speary type, not speary type. What they call them? The Sumerians call them a swarm. I'm messing this up. Swarm of archers and javelin guys. That's going to be the first. So I got a bunch of Nubians from Warlord for that. Little chief, see it? Nice little figures, and they should be fairly easy to paint because they're not actually wearing anything. So so that's going to be. I was going to do regiments down the ages. I'm going to pick from the different eras, pick iconic units that sum up that kind of aspect or that period of time. So it'd be like saying these Nubian skirmishers and Sumerian chariots or Egyptian whatevers, Syrians, whatever, Assyrian cavalry, Persian cavalry, Sparabara, it's that kind of thing. Is this? I just do one unit of each, rather than a whole army, or a small group of units if there's multiple iconic things. So that's the plan D. So I've lost not so much gaming, but just collecting and painting. At some point along the line, I'll have a proper size army for games, but probably one of my favourite, probably like Rome and Carthage or something like that. But for the rest, I'll just do these iconic regiments down the ages. So yeah, so it took taking a while to get to this point because I kept faffing about doing these other things. But that's the current plan for the ancients is just regiments down the ages. So finally, that's my plan D for ancients. do regiments down the ages until I figure out what I'm going to do for actual games. I'm going to do another one of these for Napoleonics and World War II for how I originally planned to do it. Spoiler alert, that went wrong as well. But anyway, that'll be then. Okie doke, toodle bit.